very good morning to everyone. I'm Yen Jie Song from the Education University of Hong Kong. And this morning, I'm very much honored to be the chairlady of Dr. Miriam Hauck for her keynote speech. Before she delivers her keynote speech, may I introduce her to you. Dr. Hauck is the director of the Open Center for Languages and Cultures and associate head for internationalization, equality, diversity, and inclusion in the School of Languages and Applied Linguistics at the Open University, UK. She's also a senior fellow of the UK's Higher Education Academy and has written numerous articles and book chapters on the use of technologies for learning and teaching of languages and cultures, especially in virtual exchange contests. That is, online collaborative learning between groups of students in different cultural contexts and/or geographical locations. Currently, she's scholarly work focuses on theorizing and framing the nascent field of critical virtual exchange through the social justice and inclusion lens, which aims to ensure more equitable and inclusive student exchange experiences. Dr. Hauck presents regularly, and I think not only regularly, he is one of the most prominent figure in technology-enhanced language learning. So he gave a lot of keynote speeches and workshops worldwide. She is the president of the European Association for Computer-Assisted Language Learning and the chair of the Language and Culture Expert Community of the European Association for International Education. She serves as an associate editor of the core journal and is a member of the editorial board of RealCore and Language Learning and Technology. Without further ado, now may I invite Dr. Hauck to deliver her keynote speech on critical virtual exchange for critical global citizenship education. So the floor is yours, Dr. Hauck. Thank you.
Thank you very much, my dear. Okay. Good morning. Thank you, everybody, for crawling out of bed and taking the early bus to campus, for being here. I am honored to be part of this conference, and I would like to say thank you to Didith and the team for having me, as we say in the UK. Okay, yes, okay. These are my talking points. I'm going to start with the overall context into which I'm embedding my contribution. I am going to introduce you to virtual exchange as an educational intervention. I'll also be talking about the interrelationship, of course, between virtual exchange and global citizenship education. I will zoom in on challenges associated with inclusion and exclusion in virtual exchange, which will bring me to my own framework for critical virtual exchange and its theoretical underpinnings. And after all this cognitive lifting in the first part of my talk, it will become very concrete and applied. I will share with you a few examples, critical virtual exchange examples, and I'm going to finish off with some thoughts on what the implications are for educators, for educational practice and research, if we choose critical virtual exchange as an educational intervention. But I would like to start by saying a few words about my positionality, about my locus of enunciation for those who like the jargon, because I want to make an explicit effort to contribute to the decolonization of knowledge in technology-enhanced learning and teaching in general, and in the virtual exchange space in particular. I am, as you can see, a white female academic. I have lived and worked in Germany, the US, and the UK. My area of expertise is virtual exchange and educational intervention that is also known as collaborative online international learning or telecollaboration. Sorry, it is going forward without me wanting it to go forward. Can we go one back, please? Okay. This is two back. I only wanted, yes, thank you. Okay, so my scholarly expertise is in virtual exchange. That is an educational intervention. It's also known as collaborative online international learning or telecollaboration. It does originate in the learning and teaching of languages and cultures, but it is now a practice that is increasingly popular across the curriculum, particularly since the pandemic. I've been practicing and researching virtual exchange both in the global north and in the global south, but I have only recently started to systematically unpick the assumptions underlying the discourses associated with educational technologies and their application, virtual exchange being one of them. What I'm trying to say is that I am aware and want to explicitly acknowledge that I'm speaking from a position of privilege. Next slide. Okay. The overall context for teachers, for us, for educators in societies that are becoming increasingly diverse, the question becomes how to prepare our students as citizens who can engage with complex issues in ways that reflect equity and justice. And I would like to propose virtual exchange, more specifically critical virtual exchange, as an educational intervention that can assist teachers in tackling this challenge. What are we talking about? Critical virtual exchange. I've got a little video clip that gives you a general introduction to this educational practice. Next slide, please.
As teachers, we want our students to be able to grow within a complex and rapidly changing world. How can we help them to achieve the best employment opportunities while developing themselves as human beings who are respectful of others? Research has identified a set of competencies which are key to reaching these important goals. These are being able to collaborate with others, being able to communicate in different languages with people from other cultural backgrounds, and being able to use digital technologies efficiently. How can we help our students develop all these skills? Virtual exchange is a teaching and learning practice that precisely addresses these key competencies. In virtual exchange, learners in different countries or cultural backgrounds connect through digital technologies and work together online, in pairs or small groups, on learning tasks developed by their teachers. What does a virtual exchange look like? First, the teachers on each side collaborate to design the virtual exchange. Together, they match calendars and design online activities intended to help students achieve the learning goals of their courses. In their respective classes, the teachers prepare students for the virtual exchange. Each class is split into smaller working groups which are paired with a group from the other university. In these smaller groups, they prepare to start working together on the project. Starting with an icebreaker activity, the students get to know each other and establish a meaningful relationship that will enable them to work towards a common goal during the virtual exchange. In this first activity, students also get familiar with the digital tool or tools they'll be using. After each online activity, the students in each group can share their experiences with their own classmates and reflect on the process. The teacher or facilitator supervises the students' progress and make sure the international collaboration is going smoothly. During the following online encounters, the students continue collaborating autonomously towards the completion of the final task with some degree of supervision from the teacher. Depending on the course discipline and learning goals, this final task can have multiple forms and contents. Possible scenarios include medical science students writing a joint essay comparing how patients are attended in the two countries, or Mexican and English students who are learning each other's languages create a video inviting others to visit their city, or students of web design in one class, together with students from business in the other class, create a website for a company together. The possibilities are endless. At the end of the project, students share the outcomes of their work and reflect upon what they've learned. Now that you have a better idea of what virtual exchange entails, imagine what it would look like in your course.
Okay, thank you. Now, virtual exchange is also increasingly promoted as a vehicle for the internationalization of our curricula, also known as internationalization at home, and for global citizenship education. And this is the first moment where I would like us to exercise a little bit of criticality. This is the official UNESCO definition of global citizenship education. That is, educational interventions that empower learners to engage and assume active roles both locally and globally to face and resolve global challenges and ultimately to become proactive contributors to a more just, peaceful, tolerant, inclusive, secure, and sustainable world. Scholars like Sharon Stein and Vanessa Andreotti, whose work is rooted in post-colonial theory and critical pedagogy, quite rightly, in my view, question such common understandings of global citizenship education because of its focus on self-improvement and the development of leadership skills to save the world, rather than tackling the economic and cultural roots of the inequalities in the way power, wealth, and labor are distributed globally. These scholars explicitly challenge hegemonic discourses, the masking of global complexity, and the perpetuation in education, including in technology-enhanced education, of colonial ideologies. And they encourage us to think otherwise. And this is exactly what I would like to do. This morning. I would like to encourage you to think otherwise. They promote a critical approach to global citizenship education, which has notions of power, of voice, and difference at its core, an approach that is informed by their understanding of critical literacy, including critical digital literacy, as a level of reading the word and the world that includes the development of skills of critical engagement and reflexivity, and their approach is inspired by the work of Paulo Freire. And I say a little bit more about this in a moment. Critical global citizenship education, according to Andreotti, enables learners to engage in the analysis and critique of the relationships among perspectives, language, power, social groups, and social practices. And I see a clear interface between critical approaches to internationalization at home, internationalization of our curricula, global citizenship education, and critical virtual exchange. Okay, a quick recap. What do we now know about virtual exchange? We are talking about pedagogically structured online collaborative learning between groups of students who find themselves in different cultural contexts and in different cultural locations. It combines the deep impact of intercultural dialogue with the broad reach of digital technology. It is a strong catalyst in advancing the internationalization of higher education curricula, known as, I've told you, internationalization at home. It can prepare for, it can deepen or extend or even emulate physical exchanges. By no means is it supposed to replace physical exchanges. It does prepare students for the globalized digital workplace, and it promotes the development of transversal skills such as openness, curiosity, empathy, problem solving, teamwork, and conflict transformation. But virtual exchange practices are often still electives that are available to some of the students only. So virtual exchange-based internationalization at home is not inherently inclusive or equitable. It can actually create, it can reproduce, it can perpetuate or even create new forms of exclusion, create new digital inequalities. It is prone to Western hegemonies and colonial approaches, like many forms of blended and technology-enhanced learning are. Why? Because the terms under which the exchanges take place can be influenced by factors such as the teaching partner's academic positions, their linguistic competence, the linguistic competence of the students. The hegemony of English is a big problem in virtual exchange. Access to and experience in the use of technology. And there are very often institutional constraints for the educators who want to engage in virtual exchange, like lack of support, lack of acknowledgement, and lack of rewards. And of course, there are challenges related to gender, to race, to age, and often also geopolitical challenges when educators from the global north and the global south come to work together in particular. And of course, there is the ongoing underestimation of the political and social dimension of technology use in general and in education in particular, the ongoing lack of awareness of the power dynamics that are created by educational practices, included virtual exchange, the prioritization of certain knowledges, the marginalization and underrepresentation of other knowledges, and as a result of that, the reinforcement of social and epistemic injustices. And this is why O'Dowd and Behlen conclude that we are yet to find out more about how processes of inclusion and exclusion play out in online virtual settings. To address this, I have proposed critical virtual exchange, and this is the first version of my framework. There are 4 pillars: the systematic use of low bandwidth technological solutions, exchanges that specifically target student populations that are traditionally underrepresented in study abroad or internationalization at home, those from low socioeconomic backgrounds, a systematic alignment of student exchange project work with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and the systematic inclusion of local outreach activities where the students are in contact and work with local businesses, with NGOs, with charities and non-profit organizations as part of their online project work. And in a more recent version of my framework, I would like to propose the systematic integration of trans-languaging approaches as a defining element of these critical virtual exchanges, especially, but not only in exchanges where the learning and teaching of languages and cultures is the focus. Trans-languaging, for those who are not familiar with the phenomenon, means the fluid use of multiple linguistic and semiotic resources in a combined single repertoire. Yeah, semiotic resources, everything that we can use to make meaning and to communicate. Translanguaging is about practices that encourage all learners to use their full linguistic and semiotic budget, all the modes that are available to them to make meaning and to communicate. It's about empowering them and help them to realize their full multimodal communication potential. And this is particularly relevant in technology-enhanced learning in general and technology-enhanced language learning in particular. And multimodal communicative competence, the ability to express ideas across a wide range of modes, including words, spoken and written, images, still and moving, sound, 3D models, and a combination or combinations of all of the above. Promoting translanguaging means fostering positive attitudes towards multilingualism and multimodal online communication, and should, in my view, also be a defining element of critical virtual exchange, informed by critical computer-assisted language learning or technology-enhanced language learning. I see critical virtual exchange as an instantiation of critical global citizenship education, which, as I've shared with you, has notions of power, of voice, and of difference at its core, requires critical engagement, reflexivity, unlearning, and relearning. I see it as a vehicle for action, for public engagement, and socio-political change, and as a vehicle that systematically addresses social justice, inclusion, coloniality, both at institutional and individual level. And at this point, you may start asking yourself, why does she actually feel so strong about this? The reason is that I am at the beginning of the last decade of my professional life, and I have made a promise to myself that I only want to do work that is socio-politically relevant. So this a bit of a backdrop for what is coming now. I see critical virtual exchange as being informed by and as informing critical digital literacy, which examines how power operates in digital contexts, how it shapes knowledge, identities, and social relations in ways that privilege some and marginalize others. But it also equips learners with the tools to examine the linguistic and the non-linguistic features of digital media, to identify their embedded biases and assumptions. And for me, most importantly, it leverages digital technologies for social justice-oriented action and change. But to achieve critical digital literacy, Brown 2017 reminds us that critical digital literacy provision needs to be anchored in real-life settings in a more principled way, and that it needs to take account of the socio-political contexts within which we are operating. Now, critical virtual exchange happens in real-life settings and has reflexive use of technology as one of its defining elements. It provides an ideal setting for such contextualization and for exercising critical agency and critical digital citizenry through, for example, collaborative UN SDG-aligned student project work. I also see critical virtual exchange as an ideal context to promote critical AI literacy, which I see as a subset of critical digital literacy. It overlaps, in fact, with critical digital literacy. It is context-specific, of course, and it is based on an understanding that literacy is a social practice. It is not something that you have, it is something that you do. And it is specifically concerned with the perpetuation of epistemic injustices through large language models. And it explicitly puts the equality, diversity, inclusion, and access lens on the use of generative AI in learning and teaching. It requires self-reflective mindsets and is essential for a more inclusive and diverse AI education. I also see critical virtual exchange as being informed by, but also informing critical computer-assisted language learning, critical technology-enhanced language learning, which is about the engagement with issues of power and inequality, and an understanding of how our classrooms and how our conversations are related to broader social, cultural, and political challenges. And critical call and critical tell is also about acknowledging that the world is inequitably multilingual and technologized. And finally, I see critical virtual exchange as being informed by and also informing critical diversity literacy, which is an analytical orientation that allows a person, that allows us to read social relations as one would read a text, and to recognize the ways in which possibilities are opening up for us or are closing down on us, depending on how we are positioned and on how we are able to position ourselves within bespoke social contexts. In her critical diversity literacy framework, Stein, who holds the only chair worldwide in critical diversity literacy at the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. In her framework, she promotes several criteria, and I have picked those that I think are most relevant for critical call, critical tell, and virtual exchange, and are also potentially most achievable through virtual exchange. That is an understanding that social identities are learned and are an outcome of social practices, that we need to develop a diversity grammar and a diversity vocabulary that facilitates discussion on topics such as privilege and oppression. And that another very important element is the ability to translate or to see through and interpret coded hegemonic practices. And what all these theoretical underpinnings have in common is their concern with issues related to socio-political and economic power imbalances, and their impact on an individual's, on a learner's agency, most specifically their critical consciousness and agency in Paulo Freire's spirit, in the spirit of his critical pedagogy, that is the ability to read the world critically and the ability to act in the world to change it. Okay, so far the theory. What does it look like when most of these elements come together? My first example, reading the city and making your city sustainable, brought together undergraduate students from 3 disciplines: multimodal communication, tourism, and teacher education from 3 different countries. So this is a tridem, 3 educators working together from Argentina, Poland, and Sweden. The students worked in 10 international teams, each team with 1 to 3 participants from each institution. They did use English as a lingua franca. They collaborated through interacting in synchronous and asynchronous mode. And the focus was on the critical exploration of their respective urban environments through the lens of United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 11, which is about making cities inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. These educators have worked together twice, in 2020 and 2021. And the learners were encouraged to use multimodal and multilingual resources to convey meaning in their online interactions. So in their interactions to go beyond the traditional written and spoken word. So in the first iteration, the task sequence the learners were involved in looked like this. The first part was about breaking the ice and about getting to know each other and to familiarize with the online tools in preparation for the main project phase. And then in the next task, they explored the potentials of multimodal meaning making by sharing and critically analyzing popular and official websites of their respective cities with the focus on the stories and the values that were promoted on via those websites. And then they engaged in selecting and sharing examples of how their cities figure in aesthetic texts such as music, poetry, or literature, with the intention to identify critical or controversial issues such as segregation, poverty, crime, prejudice. And then finally, their collaborative project work, that is, they working together in cross-cultural teams and designing their own multimodal city texts based on a critical theme that they had chosen. In the second iteration, The educator team, the 3 educators, decided to put even more emphasis on critical agency and citizenry. And in this iteration, the student teams researched sustainability issues in urban settings, in their respective urban settings, starting from the question, how is Sustainable Development Goal number 11 addressed in your city? Where are opportunities and challenges? And again, they created a multimodal product, in this case, sustainability campaigns that were relevant to issues, that challenges in their 3 urban contexts. Multimodal and multilingual sustainability campaigns, by the way. So the collaborative process they engaged in involved going locally to town, explore problems and look at existing initiatives to address these problems, talking to local experts, talking to local grassroots activists engaged in topics ranging from recycling and pollution to strategies for saving bees in the city, and also for making cities safer spaces for women. And this is then the knowledge they brought into the online collaborative project work. And you can see that in this way they did not only address sustainability in terms of environmental challenges, but also sustainability in terms of social sustainability by explicitly addressing social justice issues, in this bespoke case, social justice issues that are a challenge for women. In the next example, the YES project, Youth Entrepreneurship for Society project, which is also a model for new local employer and higher education collaborations to support the development of employability skills through critical virtual exchange. There we have business communication and management students from Cyprus University of Technology working with students from the University of Valencia. Here the educators specifically wanted to promote social entrepreneurship in English for specific purposes settings and wanted to support the students in developing their linguistic skills, their intercultural skills, their digital skills, and their teamwork skills. So via the higher education engagement offices in both these higher education institutions, the students were put in touch with and worked with local associations and NGOs. They discussed and proposed solutions to challenges their respective local communities were facing. And they presented their own new social entrepreneurship initiatives, their digital multimodal campaigns, and their digital multimodal elevator pitches in an online social entrepreneurship fair. And here comes my final example. The Yanomami documentary, this is an exchange where I'm currently mentoring 2 educators, a colleague from Venezuela and a colleague from Brazil. So here students from Brazil and from Venezuela work in small cross-national teams. They explore the challenges faced by the Yanomami indigenous communities who live on the Brazil-Venezuela border. And they conduct interviews in both countries with experts who are working with Yanomami communities, and this is via NGO involvement. They also work with open access resources that are provided by the Venezuelan University Center for Indigenous Studies, but they also carry out their own online research. At the same time, here we have a focus on critical AI literacy development, because the students are encouraged to experiment with generative AI applications during their collaborative project work. Applications such as Notebook LM, for example, that allows them to analyze for free up to 50 resources of a different nature, links, PDFs, YouTube videos, audio files, Google Docs, Google Slides, etc. Helps them to extract the main insights, to synthesize and summarize them, and makes connections between topics and presents them in different formats. The latest version of Notebook LM automatically produces a podcast for you, if that is what you need. So while carrying out their ethnographic field work, the students also engage in an analysis of, a critical analysis of the generative AI application they have chosen. They evaluate the effectiveness of the application, their limitations, and potential biases in addressing such complex social and cultural topics like they are being faced by the Yanomami. And the data we collect on the back of that comes from prompted, that is not Gen AI prompted, but prompted by the research educators, prompted written and spoken reflections and focus groups with the students. So the outcome here is a jointly produced, short, informative documentary in Portuguese and in Spanish, with concrete next steps on how to tackle the most urgent challenges faced by the Yanomami people. So, while at the same time developing a nuanced understanding of generative AI's role in digital content creation and its implications for representing sociocultural and sociopolitical challenges, and for communicating indigenous knowledge. Okay, what's the takeaway? I hope I have managed to convince you that critical virtual exchange is a scalable strategy for critical internationalization at home and critical global citizenship education, and that it will allow us to move from safe, hegemonic to brave, non-hegemonic virtual exchange and other educational interventions or similar educational interventions where learners can engage in thinking otherwise. That it can create new legacies based on an understanding of research as living knowledge, praxis knowledge that connects the lived experiences on the ground by the students, by the educators, by the administrators, and by the decision makers involved in critical virtual exchange, that links their knowledge, praxis knowledge, with the body of global critical knowledge in global citizenship education. And I hope I was able to show you that it has the potential, that critical virtual exchange has the potential to effect real change, both locally and globally, through the students' collaborative online project work. And that it can instigate transformative change at individual, at institutional, and potentially also at policy, educational policy level, one critical virtual exchange student project at a time. And with this, I would like to say, Salamat. These are my resources, my references rather, and this is what's in the pipeline. I know this was very different from what you hear during the rest of this conference, but let's not forget that it is technology that enables all of this. And we have an obligation, I feel, to critically interrogate our use of technology and also use technology for the critical interrogation of the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Hauck, for the inspiring talk. And Dr. Hauck brings a new perspective to the computer in education field. And the topic is really important in the current world. So now, let's come to the Q&A session, and the floor is yours. So, any questions? Great.
You're much more comfortable holding.
It's fine. I'm comfortable holding on.
Hi, Mirjam. Good morning. So I would like to comment on how I genuinely appreciate that you have cited or referenced Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, considering that that is widespread not only in Latin America, but also here at least in the Philippines. So it's incredibly empowering to have that type of literature in your study. I'm also curious about how cultural relativism affects in your CDL framework. Because, for example, if someone who is at least here in the Southeast Asian region, we are predominantly conservative or we are more of family-oriented, then let's say to your region, which has the idea of a monarch or the crown, wherein someone may not be that receptible or knowledgeable about those ideas relative to your region. So how does cultural relativism affect that entire framework of yours?
Hugely is the answer, the honest answer. And there is a huge challenge in addressing this in the context of doing this work without ending up stereotyping, which is a huge danger, of course, simplifying, stereotyping, the role of assumptions, prejudice that I've pointed to. So I think this is why it's important and often underestimated in critical virtual exchange work to have a quite substantial lead-in phase, what we call the warm-up phase or the icebreaker phase, where the students find out about each other, about their educational context, but also about their wider socio-political, cultural, economic contexts. And it is a real art to design lead-in activities that do that without ending up the students falling back to stereotypical ideas. But again, I think the onus is on us, on the educators, to make sure that this awareness raising, in the sense that you've just mentioned, happens before they engage in the collaborative project work proper. Because very often educators who like virtual exchange, they want to get down to the real action, to the projects. They want the students to start and say, hang on, and I've been doing this for over 20 years, you need to get everybody, give everybody time to get into the zone, this third space that they create together while preparing to work together, and where all these kind of cultural determinism elements come into play, and to foreground it, bring it to the fore, analyze it, discuss it, engage them in conversations about them, so that they become really ready for the collaborative project work itself.
Thank you very much. That's a pretty substantial answer. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your insightful keynote. Alex from the University of Hong Kong. As a program director of an e-learning master in Hong Kong U, okay? In fact, we are promoting similar thing among the colleagues, okay? I think that is very meaningful, especially to promote our students as a global citizenship, okay? But the key is when I try to promote among our colleagues, they generally find it difficult that, okay, they need to face with a lot of administrative work. According to your experience, how can we be smart lazy to organize all this stuff?
Two things. It is not for the faint-hearted, and it is initially a labor of love. But you are not on your own. Here's a bit of a pitch for an organization that I'm a founding member of, Unicollaboration. If you can Google us, unicollaboration.org. We provide materials for virtual exchange, for critical virtual exchange. We provide case studies. We provide training for educators. We mentor educators. And I'm in the process with colleagues from Beijing Foreign Studies universities of setting up a similar organization, a Chinese virtual exchange hub. So if you're interested in joining us, you'd be more than welcome.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Morning, Miriam. Thank you for that great presentation. out in the wild, when given that students engaged are part of a global CVE initiative, given that they're already immersed in the context, right now, what do you see is the more of a barrier? Is it still linguistic competence, given the generative AI tools that we have, or is it access to this technology, including GAI tools, even when they're low bandwidth?
Yeah, I do think the latter. I definitely do think the latter, but I think much more importantly, it is the mindsets of the educational decision makers in our institution and the educational policy makers. Having said that, in a very weird way, the pandemic has done us a favor, because while we had to always argue our case for collaborative online international learning and virtual exchange, as an educational intervention that perfectly well complements physical exchange, all of a sudden we found ourselves in a context where we could only interact virtually and online. And all of a sudden they could see the benefit of doing it this way, because let's not forget, worldwide, a very small percentage of students do actually have a study abroad experience, an internationalization experience. So yes, technology, definitely, is a hindrance. Language, maybe, but I see very positive trends in South America in particular, where there is more and more interest among educators of working within the continent and using Spanish and Portuguese. They have overcome this kind of awe for exchanges with colleagues from Northern America. They are becoming more self-confident in doing their own work. But definitely, still the institutional circumstances, the educational policy conditions within which pioneers like us who do virtual exchange try to push the field forward.
All right. I'm Wei Qin-Shan from the Oslo Metropolitan University in Norway. Thank you very much for your interesting and insightful presentation, Keynote. I really appreciate your work in addressing diversity, inequality, inclusion, and justice in the context of language learning and cultural exchange. So you have, this is really very relevant to the panel that we're going to organize in an hour's time. My question to you is about what can institutions do to facilitate such kind of activities? Mm-hmm. Because you mentioned that there's technological barriers, there's language barriers, and you also mentioned there's policymakers should be on board. What about faculty members, and what about administrations? And so could you share some of your insight with us in terms of how to facilitate this process?
I can. Because I've been through the process myself, and I mentor and train people who are going through this process. In fact, last night I was running a 4-hour intensive program for educators from the Netherlands who want to do this at their higher education institutions. It is good to have a pioneer. It is good to have an ambassador. It is good to have the one educator who has somehow come to this and has done it, even if a little bit under the radar, at their institution. And once you have the pioneer and the ambassador, then you are rolling, because they then can informally to start with, and then more formally as they go along, promote this kind of work. But it is overall a two-pronged approach. To me, the key to success is in the training that we offer and in the mentoring, that it is kind of an all-aboard approach. Bring the administrators, bring the tech people at the institutions, bring them in, okay, they may not want to get involved in the full continuous professional development program as like the educators, but even if they come to a couple of the sessions and get a deeper understanding of what this actually is, what the potential of this is, and how you can really open doors and windows to the world for the students, that will create a shift, for sure. I've seen it. But having ambassadors and pioneers also helps. Thank you.
Hello. Yeah. My name is Faisal, and I work in a different ecosystem. We go to villages and remote areas in underprivileged regions, and we establish schools for underprivileged children there. So we are talking about K-12 education, and we are talking about those children who may not be able to talk in other than their own regional and local languages. We connect them to the whole world. Just to give you an example, 2 weeks back, NASA had 2 hours live session with all the schools that I'm running. So that type of exposure I'm giving to those children. What type of challenges and opportunities through the language, through this technology and language translation in real time or anything else we can see in the near future for those children? Because the content that I want to deliver to them, they're mostly in English and those languages where they don't understand. So one language barrier and the cultural barrier, other things, any advice that you can give for that ecosystem?
I have colleagues who do very intensive work in the primary and secondary K-12, the secondary sector in virtual exchange. E-twinning, you may have heard of e-twinning, or of course, to get these students together, there are also ethical issues, okay? So before we even talk about languages and content, you have to make sure that there is buy-in from the education decision makers and from the parents, so you need to get those. I'm sure you are well aware of the additional challenges that you face with this age group, so I won't go there. On the one hand, I'm hopeful because of generative AI, of making content more accessible in many different languages. Of course, at the moment, in linguistics, they are called small languages, which I find problematic. I says the label said everything. Indigenous languages, heritage languages, community languages are underrepresented. So that is in itself a challenge. But I think this is a matter of time. So this is where I'm hopeful in terms of the solutions that generative AI will bring. And it is actually an opportunity for us to feed the algorithms with these kind of languages and with these kinds of knowledges that are currently underrepresented online and therefore also underrepresented in generative AI. So there's a huge piece of work that you can do, and that should make it easier for you at an institutional level and at an education policy level to get buy-in, to get funding, and to get support. But as with all things, it is important through networking to find the like-minded educators elsewhere that you want to work with. And maybe not to think outside of the country to start with. In this particular context, working across geographical distance within the same country can be totally mind-blowing. Because there will come a realization that you are not alone, your students are not alone in their situation. In the very same country, hundreds of kilometers away, other students are facing the same challenges. So you are starting probably at a different point, but you will go further and farther than others.
Thank you.
Stay spirited.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm aware of the time, so thank you very much for the heated discussion. I hope that we can develop students' critical agency through the critical pedagogy using technology and contribute to a peaceful, inclusive, tolerant, and a happy world. And thank you. Please join me to thank Dr. Hauck again for her insightful talk. As a token of thanks, I would like to present a gift for Dr. Hauck.